Imagine being a professional footballer in the Belgian First Division in 1990. Your contract is set to expire at the end of the season, and the offer to renew it comes in significantly lower, reducing your salary by 75%. Understandably, you turn down the offer and opt for a contract from a second-tier French club instead. However, you are not allowed to just leave the club. Despite your contract's expiration, your current club can demand a hefty transfer fee of the equivalent of 600,000 euros, a substantial sum for a second-tier side back then. Consequently, the club is unable to pay this fee, leading to the deal's cancellation. As a result, your career as a professional footballer is effectively blocked. You can't move. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened to Belgian Jean-Marc Bosman when he wanted to leave RFC Liège for USL Dunkirk. He found himself trapped in the transfer system established at the time. But Bosman refused to put up with it and went to court. Welcome to Insight United, and how Jean-Marc Bosman broke the established football transfer system and freed the players from slavery. Back then, the transfer business in football was quite different. Clubs were able to demand transfer fees for players even when their contracts were set to expire at the season's end. A transfer free of charge was basically not possible. By offering particularly high transfer fees, the clubs were even able to actively prevent a transfer to another club. If the player refused to extend his current contract and no other team was willing to pay the proposed transfer fee, the club was authorized to suspend the player. According to the regulations of the UEFA and the local football associations at that time, this procedure was absolutely legal. Let's take a closer look at the rules that applied in the pre-Bosman era. All contracts signed with players must end on June 30th. Before the contract expires and no later than April 26th, the club must present the player with a new contract offering a fixed minimum salary, back then 30,000 Belgian francs per month. Should the player reject this offer, their name is added to a transfer list. For all players on this list, a so-called forced transfer is permitted in May. This allows the player to leave the club without its consent, although the new club must pay a transfer fee calculated by multiplying the player's annual gross income by a specific factor depending on the age of the player. If no forced transfer takes place, the so-called free transfer phase ensues from June 1st to June 25th, during which the transfer fee can be freely negotiated between the clubs. Should no transfer occur, the club must offer the player a new contract for at least one season on the same terms as those offered in April. If the player rejects this offer again, the club reserves the right to suspend him from playing. Should no transfer or contract extension take place during the suspension period, the player can only be transferred after 2 full seasons in which he was not allowed to play. Of course, players had recognized this issue long before Bosman's case came to light. In 1976, the renowned German footballer Paul Breitner criticized the system. He remarked, "The entire concept of transfer fees is fundamentally unlawful. It contradicts fundamental rights and the basic dignity of human beings." Also, the Swiss footballer Georges Perroud took legal action on this very matter in 1975. His club, Servette Geneva, placed Perroud on the transfer list in May 1972 without prior notice. Despite receiving offers from other clubs, Servette Geneva rejected them, claiming the transfer fees were too low. In doing so, they blocked a transfer and thus the player's further career. Perraud described this as slavery, went to court, and was found to be right. The Swiss Federal Supreme Court ruled that transfer fees are illegal. However, as Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, this ruling only held jurisdiction within Swiss territory. So, despite the significant legal development, it didn't garner widespread attention. Lucien Schmidlin, then president of the Swiss Football League, expressed minimal concern, stating, "I'm not worried about this case." It then took another 14 years before Jean-Marc Bosman had the courage to sue his current club RFC Liège, the Belgian Football Association and the UEFA. He argued that UEFA's existing transfer rules violated his right to freely choose his place of work within the European Union, as stipulated in the 1957 Treaty of Rome. In November of 1990, just a few months after he filed the lawsuit, a Belgian court ruled in his favor. Despite an appeal filed by the Belgian Football Association, Bosman's stance prevailed once again. The judges ruled that Bosman should have been able to transfer free of charge at the end of his contract and called for a standardized regulation at European level. Subsequently, Bosman and his lawyers planned to take the case to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. At this point, the UEFA realized that the judges in Luxembourg would probably also rule in Bosman's favor. Fearing the consequences, they reportedly offered him around $1 million in hush money to drop the case, but Bosman rejected and decided to continue fighting. Finally, on December 15, 1995, the European Court of Justice ruled that professional footballers had the same rights as regular employees and were therefore also free to choose their place of work without being restricted. The official judgment reads, Article 48 of the Treaty of Rome of the 25th of March 1957 is to be interpreted as prohibiting a football club from being able to demand and receive payment of a sum of money when one of its players whose contract has expired is engaged by another club. Or, in simple terms, clubs are no longer allowed to demand transfer fees for players whose contracts will expire at the end of the season. The Bosman-Ruling freed the players from the control of the clubs and gave them a great deal of power to actively shape their own careers. The free transfer as we know it today was born. One of the first top players to benefit from this was legendary midfielder Edgar Davids, who moved from Ajax Amsterdam to AC Milan on a free transfer in the summer of 1996. As you would expect, the ruling was and still is criticized by numerous club managers. Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, the longtime CEO of Bayern Munich, expressed his sentiments in a 2013 interview with the Munich-based newspaper Merkur. Just remembering the Bosman ruling still makes my stomach churn today. There has never been a more negative influence. I would say that the players and the agents are still rubbing their hands today, but the clubs and associations were the ones who paid the price. Yet it's important to recognize that the Bosman ruling isn't solely accountable for the fact that transfer fees and salaries exploded in the years following its enactment, allowing players and agents to fill their pockets. Indeed, it is true that the judgment has strengthened the players' negotiating position. Especially at the end of their contract, they can exert great pressure on the club to either sign a new contract at significantly better terms or move to another club. In addition, the transfer business experienced an extra boost as clubs were now forced to sell players with only 1 year left on their contracts in order to receive a transfer fee. Above all, however, the huge increase in salaries and transfer fees was due to the ever-increasing commercialization that already began in the late 80s and early 90s. Nevertheless, it's undeniable that the Bosman ruling has profoundly shaped the football industry and significantly contributed to its current state. Sadly, Bosman himself did not benefit from the ruling. Throughout and after the legal proceedings, he claimed to have been shunned by the football community, which prevented him from actually resuming his career. After the trial, he even lived in his parents' garage for a while. Despite receiving a compensation payment of €780,000 9 years after the end of the trial, Bosman is now living in very humble conditions again and is dependent on donations and social welfare. But regardless of his current situation and the consequences that the ruling had for his career, he said in a 2015 interview with international media outlet Deutsche Welle that he would go to court again. He stated, "It was a ruling that was exceptional, and I was able to do something positive. So I am proud of this decision, and I think that if I had to do it all over again, I would."